since 2017 to now, it's really kind of grown like gangbusters, hitting $1 trillion last year.
Zelle just crossed $1 trillion in annualized payments. That makes them easily the largest peer-to-peer payments network in the United States. They're bigger than Cash App and Venmo combined.
So we have 2,200 banks right now in the network. Yes, we have the largest banks, but 95% of that 2,200 is actually local community banks and credit unions.
But you don't hear about Zelle very much in the fintech community. So to rectify that, today I'm talking to Denise, who runs Zelle from their offices in downtown San Francisco.
So I think that Zelle is different for two fundamental reasons as a product.
She's going to talk through how that network came together, why they've been able to outpace their rivals, and how she's thinking about growth in the future.
On the SMB side, we launched what we're calling just in pilot form now, but in the summer, we're going to continue to scale this out.
We're even going to talk about the extent to which Zelle might think about opening up what has historically been a closed network. Could, for example, a fintech in the future partner with Zelle to offer consumer payments to their end customers?
Exactly, we have tremendous distribution.
I run a fintech fund focused on seed investing. That means I spend a lot of time thinking about payments and about networks, but I still learned a ton talking to Denise. So this is going to be a great conversation for anyone who cares about what the future of consumer payments looks like. Turns out there's still a lot of problems.
There's still a lot of problems
in
with payments,
that
exactly.
Can be helped. Well, Denise, great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
First, tell us a little bit about this space and where we are.
So we are in San Francisco. It's new space that we opened up in January of 2024 in order to meet our employees where they are. So we see that a lot of folks like to come in around Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, come to do in-person meetings, to have partnership meetings, and we're starting to see a lot of people just enjoy the space, and the views are incredible.
Yeah, we've got a nice view of Salesforce Tower, Salesforce Park, all of that. I've been to a lot of offices in downtown SF recently, and your office is actually one of the most full ones I've been in. So kudos to you on getting folks to come into the office. And then you share this office building, I think, with some other notable SF companies as well.
Yes, exactly. So we share with LinkedIn, and we have one floor in their building.
That's awesome. Well, I want to talk about how Zelle's built into becoming, $1 trillion annualized volume powerhouse in peer-to-peer payments. But first, I want to talk about your story, because you actually used to be at Venmo, a competitor. So what's your story, and why did you end up switching to a competitor?
Yeah, so if I even take a step back of how I ended up in payments, I ended up just having a lucky conversation with some folks at American Express back in, it's back in 2011. So imagine a time when there was no such thing as any of the wallets, and they knew technology and payments was going to be a thing because everything else was being transformed and evolved by technology. And so American Express was setting up a business unit that they were calling this Fintech incubator. So I went to Amex. I met this amazing team that was so energized by the idea of how technology can transform payments. And we also spent a lot of time talking about financial inclusion, thinking about how technology can make payments cheaper. If you started to get some of the infrastructure costs of a system, what would that look like from the consumer's perspective? And could you provide better products? So I was super energized to join the team. I'm so lucky that they took me on because, again, I knew nothing about payments. And I spent 5 years there, really, in those early days of wallets, thinking about how technology could transform payments. And then at the time, the gentleman who was running that business unit, Dan Schulman, he went over to lead the team at PayPal. So there was a group of us that followed him over there and followed that vision. And so I ended up spending close to 8 years at PayPal. I started doing corporate strategy, which was such a cool time to be able to do that work because it was the time that PayPal was just becoming public. Yeah. So what was it going to be like as a public company? And if you were going
PayPal was like Stripe at that point in time, like one of the original great Silicon Valley companies, a little over 10, I guess more than 10 years old, but similar in age to Stripe. And Stripe had barely gotten started.
Exactly. I remember even those early days, like we would go to conferences and Stripe was like definitely that upstart. And so it's been incredible to see that growth, but really I was at the point where PayPal had just rolled out of eBay, right? And so thinking about, okay, where are we going to prioritize? We were in tons of markets, but really like which markets should we go after? All of those great like strategic questions. Like if you are a corporate strategy geek, like that's the place you want to be. And so my first 3 years I did that. And then I moved into the credit business, focused on really just global corporate development. And then the last deal I did was for the Venmo credit card. And then I spent a lot of time with the Venmo product team. I had always, when I was working at PayPal, loved the Venmo team and was like really excited to think about like how can you actually monetize this asset. And so then I had the opportunity to go over and lead the day-to-day to Venmo. And then in 2020.
And what years was that you led the?
So I was there. I was there from 2020 to 2022, leading the daily operations of it. And then towards the end of 2022, there was just leadership changes that were happening in PayPal. And so I decided to take a step back, take some time off. I'd also lost my mom during the pandemic. And so I was just like, this is a great time to like take a break. And then took a lot of time to think about what I was going to do next.
Yeah.
And then I met Cam Fowler, who is the CEO of Early Warning. And so for people, Early Warning is kind of this, I know.
Yeah, break it down for folks who don't know who Early Warning or EWS is.
Yeah.
What they do, and then we can talk about Cam and your story to joining Zelle.
And it's funny because I wasn't that aware of Early Warning either. Like I knew about Zelle, but I didn't realize that it had a parent company, Early Warning. So Early Warning is a company that's owned by the 7 largest banks. So think Chase, think Bank of America, think Wells Fargo, PNC, US Bank, Truist, and Capital One. They own Early Warning, and it was started about 35 years ago in order to really combat fraud in the system. So it actually started as a way that if there's check fraud over at US Bank, wouldn't it be really helpful if Chase knew that as well?
To get an early warning.
It's a little bit too like spot on, but yes, that's exactly it. So thinking about that, like really early days of how do you share that data in order to make the ecosystem safer? And then that business just started to build more and more products, building upon the data assets. And then in 2017, basically the banks came together and said, we need to figure out how to do P2P transfers across all the banks. And that's how Zelle was basically founded. And since 2017 to now, it's really kind of grown like gangbusters as a network, hitting $1 trillion last year. And then recently, Early Warning has also launched Pays back in the fall.
And if you think about the history of other bank-to-bank networks like Visa being a spin-out, you can see how this is a thing that makes sense for banks to own stuff.
Yeah, it makes sense for banks to own stuff, especially when you think about like safety and security and how important sharing data across the ecosystem is just better for everyone.
Yep. And so take us back to the story of you meeting Cam Fowler.
So Cam and I went to breakfast. I remember it was like really one of those like cold, bitter days in New York, right? Where I'm like, ugh, like I don't really want to go to an 8:30 breakfast. And we met for breakfast, and I was really impressed by the vision he had for Early Warning and the ambition he had for Zelle and just his overall, I think, energy and intellectual horsepower. And he got me excited because then I started talking about things like small businesses. So when I was at PayPal, I spent a lot of time thinking about working capital. And what I got super excited about was when you talk about providing these small businesses with a little bit of capital based on their data, how they can actually grow their businesses. And when you hear those stories, right, when you hear like whatever, the pizza place growing from 3 employees to 7 employees, like that's super inspiring to me and goes back to this idea of financial inclusion. And so we started having this conversation about small businesses and how you can really think about providing more and more capabilities and tools for small businesses to be able to grow. And so then I kind of got hooked and I was like, oh, there are still problems left in payments that I could probably go and help. Yeah,
it turns out there's still a lot of problems.
There's still lots, exactly.
Yeah. And then talk us through how Zelle's different from the other networks. Yes, it's peer-to-peer, but a lot of the use cases are different.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that Zelle is different for 2 fundamental reasons as a product. One, it sits in the mobile bank app, right? So that's this incredible distribution arm. So we have 2,200 banks right now in the network. And yes, we have the largest banks, but 95% of that 2,200 is actually local community banks and credit unions, right? So we really are going like after the long tail to try to make this network as ubiquitous as possible. But by being in the bank app, that almost already gives you a stamp of approval or a stamp of legitimacy. So there's this piece of it that comes with trust and security by having that distribution. Also, you're in the hands of millions of customers immediately by being in the bank app. Like they never have to download
There's the
anything
old adage
separate.
about distribution versus innovation, and you get tremendous distribution by being baked in.
Exactly. We have tremendous distribution. The second piece of it is because the way the product is by going from account to account, you have your money so quickly that you can use it immediately.
Yeah.
Like we talk to people, the one story that I love is about this like mom who she's struggling to make ends meet. She's in the grocery store. She's going from aisle to aisle, like doing the mental math of how much she's going to have to pay at the register. Her daughter calls. She can sense the stress her mom has, and she immediately Zells her mom.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, like her mom doesn't have to worry about paying at the cashier, right?
Yep.
Because she can see the money immediately in her account. So stories like that, and I think that piece of the product has also been what made it so successful.
Yeah, and it is a killer feature as well to have the money in your bank account. As
Right.
you know from Venmo, they make a lot of money from instant payouts back into the primary account. Don't need that feature when it is already the account to account.
Exactly.
So some different product kind of architecture and different network setup,
Yep.
but also different consumer use cases in terms of the kinds of payments
Yes.
that folks are making.
Yeah, I think so. So it's interesting because I think, again, because it's coming through your bank account, people tend to lean towards different use cases. So our average transaction size is significantly higher than other players in the market.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because like we see a lot of payments towards rent. So
Yep.
our biggest days are always the first of the month. Like hands down, they're the biggest days, and it's because of those rent payments. We also have
Was May 1st a new record for you guys?
It was,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah, it was.
We won't get into numbers. But yeah, I'm sure every first of the month is an exciting time for you guys.
It is. And then when it lands on a Friday, that's like a double whammy, right? Because you have like a payday plus rent. So that those become the really exciting days. You're also like always on those hyper care days, just like checking in and making sure everything's working, right, guys?
yeah, interesting. We're in the CTO's office today where we're filming this. So
Exactly.
Fridays plus first of the month is probably a big day for him.
That's exactly it. It's a big day for all of us. So, but yeah, so we definitely have those hyper care days to make sure everything's working well. So we see rent payments. We also, our small business payments are growing really quickly. We just made the announcement that we have 7 million verified small businesses on the platform. We have an additional like 3 to 4 million like gig workers who are getting independently paid. But whenever you see those transactions also to SMBs, they tend to be a little bit higher as well.
Yeah.
So we're just seeing like a higher average transaction than most of the industry.
Yeah, and break down to the different network participants because it is peer-to-peer, but it's also peer-to-business. So you have those SMBs. So talk about how both those constituencies are using it right now.
Yeah, so peer-to-peer is basically, think of it as if you potentially are paying your roommate back for groceries, you could even be sending, we hear a lot of stories about like grandparents sending grandchildren gifts because they feel confident about the bank network. And all of those typical use cases that you could imagine. When you go to more of like the SMB payments, what we tend to see is things like the landscaper getting paid or potentially even the dog walker. We went around and we grabbed all these great anecdotes when we were doing this SMB study, and we talked to the surf instructor in LA who gets paid for surf lessons.
Yeah.
I'm from the Jersey Shore, so that's like a little bit of a soft spot for me. Or the gentleman who's basically selling hot dogs in New York City, he's even accepting Zelle. And so you're starting to see that pop up even more.
Yep, that is exciting. And another question I had for you that I think a lot of the audience will be very interested in is how do you think about growing the Zelle network and maybe opening it to non-bank participants? Like could a Chime or a Mercury Personal let their customers use Zelle? Yeah.
So the first question in terms of how do we think about growing it? So one is we are continuing to build out that tail. So we have 2,200 banks and credit unions now, but there's still a little bit ways to go. If you think about the coverage, that's about like 83% of all accounts in the US we have coverage. We would obviously like to get as close to 100% as possible. So we still have some work to do on that long tail. The other way that growing it is like leaning into the consumers that are using it and then those who actually haven't necessarily used it so that it could be in their bank accounts, but they haven't lit it up yet. Right now, we are focused on the folks who are FDIC insured, but we're always listening to consumers to understand where the demands are.
And it sounds like maybe there's potentiality there, whereas I feel like when I've talked to folks in the past or years ago, it's like not even on the radar. So
It's on the radar.
it's on the radar.
It's on the
That's
radar.
where, so not this year, maybe not next, but on the radar, which will be interesting to see who uses and why. Talk through some of the other growth vectors you're excited about in growing the network. I know we've already talked a little bit about SMB, and that's something you're particularly passionate about.
Yeah, so obviously when I think about the different use cases, so P2P, we still have some ways to go in terms of marketing through some of the bank channels, making sure people know that they have it and that they can use it in more ways. So the person who's just using it monthly for rent, like how can they actually use it in more ways, like maybe splitting dinner on a Sunday night or potentially paying their dog walker. But then also the SMB piece we get super excited about. On the SMB side, we launched what we're calling Zelle tags, just in pilot form now. But in the summer, we're going to continue to scale this out. And that's the idea that instead of just sending, I'm the dog walker, instead of just sending the Zelle to my email or my phone number, you would send it to Denise's dog walking. So something as simple as that. But what we're actually seeing in the pilot version is that SMBs who are new sign up for it, and they actually have a higher average transaction value and also volume than without those tags. And it's something that's so simple, but we're starting to see traction on that. And that's really just the beginning of the overall SMB roadmap. So there's lots of you can just play out all the different SMB payment tools that we want to go and tackle for the next 18 months.
So one SMB owner can have multiple tags for different customer types, products, that sort of thing.
Exactly. And then you can imagine just making it easier, right? Like we have to do some work on our QR code, right? It's not, if you compare our QR code to others, I think we've fallen down a little bit. So we're going to lean in and fix that and make it a better experience, right? Other places that you can also imagine things that become interesting further out is, what does tipping look like in the Zelle experience, right? So you can start to tack on ways to make small businesses grow much more easily with Zelle. The other couple of use cases that I get excited about is we actually have a fairly robust disbursement product that nobody knows about.
Interesting. Maybe more people should know about it.
Maybe
Tell us about the disbursement product.
More people should know about it. So this is the idea that you are an insurance company and you want to send out multiple payouts, or a class action lawsuit, right? Sending out multiple payouts. And it's just a really easy way to send out disbursements. And part of it is just making sure that we have a great go-to-market strategy in motion.
I think disbursements for insurance payouts or class action lawsuits, oftentimes they're paying 5 to 10% processing fees to get those small dollar volumes out. Whereas you could imagine with Zelle, where you have a pre-vetted identity and an instant rail, you could do that for a lot less.
That's exactly it.
And then for you guys, I'm sure it's exciting to think about broadening the network in terms of showing people the value of a real-time payment rail.
That's exactly it.
One thing that Zelle has been in the press for is not just the volumes, but also with fraud. So talk to us about what's been going on with fraud and what you guys are doing to address it.
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of this work actually happened before I showed up. So I showed up a little bit more than a year ago. And the teams have been working on reducing fraud and scams across the network for the past several years. So it's actually a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get us to this point. But we've gotten to a point where we are now at about there has been no fraud reported on 99.95% of the network last year. And in comparison of that, that's actually better than the debit rails and how debit's doing. So we have really spent a lot of time leaning in to ensure that we are the safest network. The 3 ways that we're doing that is, 1, just overall technology. So making sure that we have really robust risk models in place and that we are flagging fraud and we're also just stopping it on the network. The second thing is just overall in the product. So some people would say, oh, it's not as seamless as it should be. And that's by design. So
I get a lot more SMS verifications in Zelle than I used to.
Yep. And that's by design, right? So the idea is that providing those little speed bumps along the way to make people stop and really think about, am I sending to the right person? Is this the right phone number? And just make them hesitate for a moment. And that's actually been really effective. Again, it's not as seamless as some people would like, but it's there for a purpose. And then the third thing is around education. So we're
Yeah.
going out and we're talking to folks all the time about the right ways to use Zelle, and always just to ensure that they're sending to people that they know and trust. We talk about the puppy scam a lot. So the idea that you might go on a social media platform to buy a puppy, and then you send off your money, and then the puppy never shows up. So that the idea is, if you're going to buy a puppy, make sure you've actually like hugged the puppy before you send the money.
That's a good idea. I've never bought a puppy online, nor do
well.
I do I plan to. Also talk about who owns fraud and the liability around fraud, banks versus consumers versus the network.
Yeah, so it depends on the use case. All fraud is owned by the banks themselves. And then depending on the scam, it's either between the financial institution or on the consumer side. So think about if there is a scam in terms of that somebody has been spoofed, right?
Yeah.
That will usually tend to go to the financial institution. But then again, if it's something like the puppy scam of they sent it to the right person and the money went to the right place, but there was just no puppy, right? Then that's on the consumer.
Yep. And then I do want to get into the weeds of the settlement infrastructure, which is probably going to be very boring for some people, but we've got a lot of nerds listening too. So talk to me about the actual settlement infrastructure that runs behind Zelle.
Yeah, so Zelle, what's fascinating about Zelle is that we're actually just the messaging network. So we're just pinging tokens in order for the signals to come across, so that one bank receives the message on either side, so you know if you're sending or receiving. And then the settlements happen like a normal transaction. Yep,
and I think mostly over ACH is the,
exactly.
Which Visa and SWIFT, you think of them as payment networks, also just messaging networks.
Exactly.
What are the big product roadmap items for you guys in the next 6, 12, 18 months?
Yes, so in terms of product roadmap, again, it's really leaning into growing out that network, right? And making sure that, especially now, so we have shut down our mobile application that was just for people that didn't have Zelle in their bank accounts. And that was a specific choice because we had already gotten to near ubiquity. So we want to make sure that if a bank wants to be in the Zelle network, that they come on the Zelle network. So we're focusing a lot of time and energy on that. The other place that we're spending a lot of energy is small businesses. So that roadmap that I was talking a little bit about, like really leaning in to figure that out, to make sure that we have the right features and capabilities. And I think that that's probably going to be a product roadmap that lasts anywhere from 2 to 3 years. Like there's just so much you can do in small businesses. And then the other piece of it is just making sure that we have the right features and capabilities on the P2P side, right? So making sure that we have the safest, most secure network for people to be able to send money to people that they love.
Yep. I'm sure just with the tags for small business, there's a lot of work to do in addition to new products and features.
No, it's true. Because even like if you think about like launching a feature or capability, it's not just about launching on the network, but it's about having it adopted by 2,200 banks. Right? So it's a little bit of a different animal than in other places.
Yep. You're the GM of Zelle, which means, you're in charge of it. You're running it, everything from managing the P&L to hiring the team. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you've been building the team. Also, where you're hiring, what types of roles and positions that you're like most in need of as you keep growing Zelle.
Yeah. So when I came in, the team was wonderful, especially the folks who have really had leaned into the fraud work in the past few years. So there was such strength there. And really, it was about fortifying the teams more than anything. So over the past year, we have built out the product team, probably to maybe 3x the size of it as it was. It's not a huge product team, but as we think about these other use cases, it was really about starting to organize them around the use cases and building them around like business unit lines. So that when I talk about SMB, for instance, it's not just a feature on the side, but instead it's an actual business that should be managed with its own product roadmap. So that's a little bit of the organization, and I think a little bit of the evolution of the organization that we had to do. We've also built out more of our ops team, just in terms of thinking about how to manage through the network. So thinking that we needed to have individuals who were managing the bank relationships, who were fostering that, both from a deployment perspective, but also like a go-to-market perspective. Because like the best way to get our message out is like through the bank channels. So how can we work with them better in order to make sure that we're getting that messaging out? And then we have done a little bit of work in terms of strengthening the fraud team, adding a few more bodies around it, adding a couple of people in the marketing folks, and just really thinking about like up-leveling a lot of the conversation, the strategy.
Yeah. One thing I found interesting was your approach to fraud tooling that you use. Do you use any third parties for fraud tooling, or is everything
Mostly it's in-house, yeah.
Yeah. And why is that, and what drove that? I can imagine some from the history, but I think it'd be interesting for the audience to understand, oh, like, wow, Zelle has built most of their fraud stack in-house.
Yeah, so we've built most of the fraud stack in-house. There's like a couple, we're not doing it completely alone. There's a couple of vendors that we have to enable us. But because the network is so unique, we wanted to build the risk models internally and make sure that that was part of our own intellectual property.
Yeah. And then in terms of growing the team, New York, San Francisco, Scottsdale?
I think we're open to any of the locations. What we're finding is that we have such a tremendous legacy in Scottsdale, and that's been super helpful. Where we're finding, I think, new talent is coming from New York and San Francisco primarily.
Yeah. I think you haven't done that much traveling in San Francisco recently. How have you found the city on this visit?
The weather's beautiful. So, and I always love San Francisco because I think it's one of the prettiest cities. So walking in the office this morning was delightful.
It's beautiful. And you walked right through downtown, which a lot of people say is pretty crazy. We have work to do. I'm not going to say that it's perfect here, but yeah, there's lots of good stuff going on.
There's lots of good stuff. I also have lived in New York for over 20 years, so it's hard to scare me that much at this point.
Yeah. I will say you picked an exceptionally good weekend. It was like
beautiful.
80, which almost never happens.
No, the sun is shining. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Any other kind of agenda items for the visit here with the team?
I think we're just super excited at this point, just in terms of the overall growth that we have and continuing to meet customers where they are. So I think that this is really like a moment for us to not only celebrate the $1 trillion, but then also plan how we're going to get to the next trillion.
Yeah. And we've got a lot of fintech founders, operators in the audience. Anything you'd like to leave them with, or things you think they should be paying attention to with regards to EWS or Zelle?
I just think that the space is moving so quickly now, right? Which is super exciting, and there's lots of opportunities everywhere. So I think it is about figuring out like the one or two places where you want to win, getting extremely focused there and going after it.
Yep, absolutely. Well, awesome. Thanks so much for walking us through all of that, and I look forward to hearing about the next trillion in payments for you guys.
Thank you for having me.